And this is why when the Prophet ﷺ said, pray 2 rakats in Masjid Al Aqsa, Umar wanted to be that man who opened the gates for the believers. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Maulana Muhammad. Wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawm ad-din wa ba'd. Respected brothers, elders, sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I thought we'd continue where we left off a good few weeks ago, which was on the conquest of Al Aqsa. And if I remember rightly, I finished off on the narration of Abu Sufyan speaking to Heraclius, which is related by Imam Bukhari rahimahullah in his Sahih. Now, within the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, the Messenger of Allah told about a day that the Muslims would take Masjid Al Aqsa. And this is a miracle of the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ passed away and nothing happened. Abu Bakr becomes the Khalif, nothing happens. Then in the time of Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu, you have a very famous battle, the Battle of Yarmouk, which was Khalid bin Walid against the Byzantines. The Byzantines were one of the superpowers of the day. They ruled all the way from East Europe all the way into Sham and that area. So in the Battle of Yarmouk, the Muslims, they defeat the Byzantines. When they defeat the Byzantines, Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah radiyallahu anhu, who was the commander, the general of this army, sends a letter to Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu, who was in Medina, and he says to Amir al-Mu'mineen, what shall we do next? Where should we go? So Umar radiyallahu anhu says, go to Al Aqsa, go to Al Quds, go to Jerusalem. Then Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah radiyallahu anhu replies and he says, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, there is one issue, and the issue is that Al Quds, the man who is in charge of Al Quds is a man called Artabun, and nobody can take Al Quds because Artabun was known for his intelligence. Nobody could compare with this guy. So Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu now writes him a letter and he says to him, we will strike the Artabun of the Romans with the Artabun of the Arabs. Send him Amr ibn As. Who was Amr ibn As radiyallahu anhu? Amr ibn As radiyallahu anhu was one of the most intelligent out of the Sahaba radiyallahu anhu. Him and Khalid bin Walid radiyallahu anhum both embraced Islam on the same day. Both of them. Khalid bin Walid radiyallahu anhu, who says, when I walked up to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he smiled until I placed my hand in his hand. Prophet ﷺ carried on smiling until I placed my hand in my hand, and then Amr ibn As embraced Islam, and the Prophet ﷺ said, today Makkah has thrown away its liver, meaning these were the cream of the crop. These were the best youngsters that Makkah had. So he says, we will strike him with the Artabun of the Arabs. So Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah radiyallahu anhu now sends an army with Amr ibn As in charge. And Amr ibn As radiyallahu anhu goes to Al Quds and he lays siege to Al Quds, to Jerusalem. So he sends a messenger. Messenger comes back. He's not very happy. Sends another, sends another, sends another. Every time he sends a messenger, he's outwitted by Artabun. So what he says, I will go and I will pretend I am a messenger. So Amr ibn As radiyallahu anhu goes, pretending he's a messenger. He meets Artabun. Artabun is now impressed by this messenger. So he goes back to his council and he says to his council, this guy, he doesn't seem like a messenger. So they said, how do you know? He said, I've spoken to thousands of messengers in my life. This guy is a leader because he talks like a leader. And if I am not wrong, this is Amr himself. So they say to him, so what shall we do? What do you advise? So he says that we will kill him, but because it's not, general norm to kill a messenger, So what we will do is we will allow him to leave Jerusalem, and then we will strike him with an arrow, and when he's struck with the arrow, we will say it was a stray arrow, we don't know who shot it, and he died. So Amr ibn As radiallahu anhu is now going back to the gates of Jerusalem to leave. One of the Arabs who knew what was happening, wasn't a Muslim, he says to Amr ibn As, he says, Amr, أحسنت الدخول فأحسن الخروج. You came in a very good manner, leave in a very good manner. Now Amr was very, very sharp. He realized that there is something going on. So he now goes, when he reaches the gates, he says to the soldier, he says, you know what? Maybe I can quash this problem. Allow me to go back and speak to him, and I can maybe resolve this issue, and then there will be no bloodshed. So he goes back to speak to Artabun. When he reaches Artabun, he says to Artabun, he said, Artabun, were you impressed by me? He said, yes, you're a very intelligent person. He said, tomorrow I will bring you another 9 who are as intelligent as me, and we will discuss the issue, and we will convince you that you should hand over Jerusalem to us. So he goes back to his council and said, what do you say? He says, well, it's better we kill 10 of them than 1. So Amr ibn As radiallahu anhu leaves. A day passes, a couple of days pass, and then Artabun is waiting for him, and then he sends him a letter. He said, when are you coming back? He said, I ain't coming back. That was me, and there's no chance that I'm coming back. Now Artabun, by this time Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah has come with his regiment, Khalid bin Walid has come, Sharahbil ibn Hasna. So you have 3 major regiments there who defeated the Byzantines in the Battle of Yarmouk. Artabun manages to sneak out, so he leaves the patriarch in charge. Now the patriarch says that he will give over Al-Quds, Jerusalem, but he will only give it to Umar ibn Khattab, nobody else. Now the ulama say, why? Why would he only give it to Umar ibn Khattab? Some say that they had the signs of the conqueror of Jerusalem in their books, and those signs indicated to Umar ibn Khattab. Personally, I believe the strongest opinion is that they knew about the justice of Umar ibn Khattab. They knew what Umar radiallahu anhu was like. So he sends a letter to Abu Ubaidah and he said, we will give the keys only to Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. Now Umar is in Medina. So he sends, Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah radiallahu anhu sends a letter to Umar radiallahu anhu in Medina, but with that letter go a delegation of Christians. So imagine this. They're going to meet the most powerful man on the face of this earth. So they look for the house of Umar ibn Khattab. They find this little house, but he's not there. Then they go into the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Umar radiallahu anhu is not in the masjid either. So they ask around, and some people said, well, we saw him over there. He was sitting down on a mat. So they finally find Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu sitting, the most powerful man on the face of this earth. He was sitting all by himself on a mat. And this delegation come, they give him the letter of Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah radiallahu anhu, they give him the salam of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, and the Christians are marveling because they used to pomp and glory. And you have this man who is the most powerful man on the face of this earth, and he's sitting all by himself. So Umar reads the letter, he says to them, I will do mashwara, you go back and I will let you know. So Umar radiallahu anhu then does mashwara with the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. Some of them say go, some of them say don't go. But Umar was going. You know why Umar radiallahu anhu was going? Because the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, he said, pray 2 rakats in Masjid Al Aqsa. And if you cannot pray 2 rakats in Masjid Al Aqsa, then send oil to be burnt in the lantern. This was a mu'jiza, a miracle of the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Because at that time, the Masjid Al Aqsa wasn't even in the hands of the Muslims. So here, Umar radiallahu anhu could possibly be the man who fulfills the prophecy of the Prophet ﷺ. So Umar radiallahu anhu now decides to go. But this is, look at this, this is amazing. Because these people, wallahi, Umar, these people, they lived a life which was a total and utter, emulation of the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Their life was totally and utterly devoted to this deen. This is the same Umar. Now he has a delegation that come to him and they see him sitting on the mat. This is the same Umar radiallahu anhu who entered the house of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he says, I looked around the house and he says there were hardly any provisions, a few water skins and a couple of other things. And he says, tears, I began to tear. And I said, O Messenger of Allah, look in what kind of pomp and glory the leaders of Persia, the leaders of Rome live in. And you are the greatest of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And look at the simplicity in which you live in. And the narration mentioned that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was lying down. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sat up. And he sat up, and the mat that he was lying on was so rough that it left an imprint on his side. And the Messenger of Allah said, Oh Ibn al-Khattab, Ibn al-Khattab, even you, don't you understand my example is like a man who takes shade under a tree for a little while and then he just moves on. He said, that's my life. So Umar, who was teared on that occasion, then the time comes that Umar has his opportunity, the most powerful man on the face of this earth, for his time and pomp and glory. But you know what, Umar was on the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, under a tree, and then you move on. That is what life is about. And this is why when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, pray 2 rakats in Masjid Al Aqsa, Umar wanted to be that man who opened the gates for the believers. So Umar radiallahu anhu leaves, and this is amazing. Waqidi mentioned this story, it's amazing. He leaves with what? Just one khadim. Just one other individual. And they have 2 mounts, 2 rides. One is a more superior one, and one is not as good as the former. So when they're going on this journey, they reach this village, this area, so they meet the people in the area, and because Islam had just spread newly, people are not that educated. So when he's in this village, they tell him about a man, old man, who is not old enough now to graze his flock. So he has hired another younger man to graze his flock, and his way of payment to this young man is that he allows him to have a relationship with his wife. So Umar radiallahu anhu calls him, and he says, do you actually know this is haram? And he says, no. He said, I will let you off this time, do it again and I will have your neck. Then he goes further up and he comes to another place and they tell him about a man who's married to 2 sisters. So Umar radiallahu anhu summons him and he says, you married to 2 sisters, haram is mentioned in the Quran, you can't marry 2 sisters. He said, but Amir al-Mu'mineen, I love them. So Umar radiallahu anhu says, you may love them, but it's haram in the deen, divorce one. So he divorces one. Then Umar on the same journey, he goes further up. And he comes by a place where he sees a group of non-Muslims. They're standing in the sun. They got these large pots on their head full of oil. So he says to the governor, I said, who are these people? Why are you punishing them? He said, these are Christians. And these Christians can't pay the jizya. Jizya is a tax that non-Muslims pay when they're living under Muslims. So they can't pay the jizya. So Umar radiallahu anhu says, so what if they can't pay the jizya? If they can't afford the jizya, why are you punishing them as a consequence? And Umar rebuked the governor. On another occasion, wallahi, Umar was just amazing in this sense. Just an amazing personality. On another occasion, Umar radiallahu anhu, he saw an old Jewish man begging. And he called the governor and he said, why is this old man begging? All his life he has paid taxes to us. All his life he has paid taxes to us. Now he can no longer fend for himself. You are making him beg. Umar, every child, imagine this, 1400 years ago, every child which was born in the Muslim world was given an allowance the day the child was born. Every child. To the degree You want to see the real essence of Islam. You really want to see the real essence of Islam. Then look into the life of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. The man was a khadim. A group of people came into Medina. These were travelers. So he said to Abdurrahman ibn Auf, he said, let's look after these travelers tonight. Let's do their khidmah. This is the most powerful man on the face of this earth. Abdurrahman ibn Auf is one of the 10 who's guaranteed Jannah by the Prophet ﷺ. He is a multi-millionaire. When he passed away, the wasiyah that he left behind was worth $22 million. Umar, the most powerful man on the face of this earth, and I want you to derive lessons without me saying, because I want to tell the story of the conquest. So I'm not going to go and you derive the lessons, what we learn from this. Umar, the most powerful man on the face of this earth, one of the 10 guaranteed Jannah. And then you have Abdurrahman ibn Auf, multi-millionaire, one of the 10 who was guaranteed Jannah by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, are doing khidmah of people they don't even know, and people don't know them. They don't know them. So there's a child that's crying. So Umar radiallahu anhu goes to the mother and he says, make your child quiet. She doesn't know this is Amirul Mu'mineen. So later on in the night, the child is still crying. So Umar radiallahu anhu goes back to the woman and he says, what an evil mother you are. All night your child has been crying and you haven't, made the child quiet. So she says to him, without knowing that he's Amirul Mu'mineen, she says, Amirul Mu'mineen has stipulated an allowance for those children who are no longer drinking their mother's milk. I need that allowance. Therefore, I'm trying to wean this child off, and that's why he's crying. So Umar radiallahu anhu asked the age. And she told Umar radiallahu anhu the age. And then Umar radiallahu anhu said to her, don't hasten, take your time. Abdurrahman ibn Auf says that by Allah, I cannot explain to you how Umar cried in the Fajr Salah. He cried so much that we couldn't even understand his recitation. And then after Salah, Umar radiallahu anhu turned around and he said, woe unto you, Umar. Woe unto you, Umar. How many children have you killed because of this law and qanoon of yours? And then Umar radiallahu anhu stipulated that as soon as a child is born in the Muslim world, the day they are born, they are given allowance. Umar said, if I live to next year, no woman in Iraq will need any man besides Umar ibn Khattab. Umar said, I will ensure that the Bedouins in the mountains of Yemen will get their allowance. This was Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. So Umar now, he leaves here, he goes to a place called Jabiyah. In Jabiyah, the Sahaba radiallahu anhu come to visit Umar radiallahu anhu. So you have Shurahbil ibn Hasana, Abdurrahman, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, Khalid bin Walid. Now Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah was a very simple person. The Sahaba radiallahu anhu say that we would love when Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah would smile. There was no smile more beloved to us than the smile of Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. Why? Because Abu Ubaidah was the man in the battle of Uhud. When the rings of the helmet of the Messenger of Allah went into his cheek, he didn't want to take it out with his hands. He thought it was disrespectful. So he took it out with his cheek, so he took it out with his teeth, so he lost one tooth. Then he took it out with the other tooth, and he lost the other tooth. So when he would smile, it would remind him of the sacrifice of Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anhu. So Abu Ubaidah comes simple. Shurahbil and Khalid are not dressed up. They have these nice expensive robes. So Umar is Umar. He's got 17 patches on his clothes. So Umar radiallahu anhu gets off his mount and he picks up a rock and he throws it at them. He said, even after 100 years you dress like this, I would not spare you. It's only been two years. So then they take off their robe and they've got their armor underneath it, and then Umar radiallahu anhu cools down. He goes to Jabiyah. So he says to Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah radiallahu anhu, Abu Ubaidah, one of the 10 who's also guaranteed Jannah. Umar loved Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. He said if Abu Ubaidah was still alive, Abu Ubaidah passed away before Umar radiallahu anhu passed away, he said, I would make him the next Amirul Mu'mineen. So he says to Abu Ubaidah, now Abu Ubaidah is now the governor of Sham. It's the outreach of the Muslim world, the outpost of the Muslim world. The outpost is always the richest part of the Muslim world. This is where all the wealth comes in. So he says to Abu Ubaidah, he said, Abu Ubaidah, take me to your house. So Abu Ubaidah says, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, why do you want to come to my house for? The only thing which is going to happen if you come to my house is that you're going to rinse out your eyes. And Umar said, no, take me to your house. La ilaha illallah. So he goes, Umar radiallahu anhu goes to the house of Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah radiallahu anhu. And again, for the second time in his life, he looks around the home. And there's hardly any provisions in the house of Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. And he says to Abu Ubaidah, he said, I'm hungry, do you have anything to eat? And Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anhu brings him some water and few crumbs. And Umar looks at them. And Umar radiallahu anhu said, don't you have anything besides this? And Abu Ubaidah says, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, it's enough to get me to the other side. You know, the Messenger of Allah said, I'm a musafir. I take shade under a tree and I move on. Abu Ubaidah says, you know, it's enough to get me to the other side. And Umar radiallahu anhu begins to cry. And he says, غَيَّرَتْنَا الدُّنْيَا كُلَّنَا إِلَّا أَنْتَ. He said, the dunya has changed all of us besides you, Abu Ubaidah. The dunya changes people, brothers. Dunya changes people. But Abu Ubaidah, he said, the dunya has changed all of us besides you, Abu Ubaidah. And Umar is now crying. And Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anhu says to him, he says, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, I told you don't come to my house. Because the only thing which is going to happen is that you're going to rinse out your eyes. And this is, subhanallah, this is the sacrifice of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. And I want to finish off on this. And we'll carry on next week, inshallah. For Umar to leave Medina was very difficult. But this, you understand how important Al-Quds, Jerusalem, was for Umar ibn Khattab. Umar would make a dua, Allahumma inni as'aluka shahadatan fi sabilik wa mawtan fi baladi rasulik. He would say, oh Allah, I ask you for martyrdom and death in your city. Hafsa radiallahu anha, his daughter, heard him the dua. She found it strange. If you want martyrdom, you go into the battlefield, not in Medina. But this was Umar's tamanna. This was his dream. To be martyred in Medina, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted his dua. So for Umar to leave Medina was very difficult. In his over 10 years of Caliphate, the only time he ever left Hijaz was twice. Once was this to pick up the keys of Masjid Al Aqsa. And the second time he went out and he had to come back. Never besides this did Umar ever leave the Hijaz because he wanted to die in Medina. But for Masjid Al Aqsa, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the most powerful man, traveled all the way from Medina, all the way to Masjid Al Aqsa. That's how important Masjid Al Aqsa was in the eyes of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. Inshallah, we will carry on with next week, inshallah, with the conquest of Masjid Al Aqsa, inshallah.